In a previous video, we familiarized ourselves with the enormous problems of the capitalist system. To address these problems, and create a world that truly serves the interest of the vast majority of working and poor people across the globe, capitalism must end. And this requires a revolution, whereby the majority of working people seize power and begin to reorganize society to prioritize human need instead of profit. This can't happen in one country alone or in some small corner of the planet. Capitalism is an international system, and its end requires its revolutionary overthrow internationally. So, after a revolution, where the capitalist class has been ousted and the working class is now in power, what sort of changes might we imagine taking place? We will inherit a world in crisis, with a climate emergency, mass poverty, food shortages, housing shortages, and clean water shortages. Addressing the most urgent problems that capitalism has caused and maintained will be the first order of business. Before we can reach a classless society of communism, we will require a system that is capable of dealing with the mess of capitalism, and that system is socialism. When most people hear the word socialism, they think about things like redistributing wealth, enhancing social welfare systems, and increasing school funding. But socialism, as scientifically explained by Marx and Engels, isn't just about tweaking the system by redistributing resources or improving specific conditions. It's about fundamentally changing the way our society operates. At the core, it's about rethinking who holds the power, who controls resources, and how they are used. Let's think about a historical example to clarify this. Chattel slavery. The problem wasn't just slaves' living conditions or mistreatment. The issue was the very relationship between the slave and the master. Ending the suffering of slaves required abolishing this oppressive relationship, not just tweaking it. Today, we're dealing with a similar dynamic, but in a modern context. Most people in this country and around the world are wage slaves, forced to work to survive, exploited by the capitalist class. Socialism means that the people who do the work would decide how it's done and what needs to be prioritized collectively. Today, we won't have time to dive into every corner of our lives that could change if we achieve a global socialist revolution, but we'll focus on some of the most pressing problems we would address. All of the major problems are global in scale, so the solutions must be as well. Take climate change, for example. We've known for decades what we need to do to address this issue, yet we're still hurtling towards an uninhabitable planet at breakneck speed. Insane storms, fires, droughts, and natural disasters are only escalating, while the dependence on a global economic infrastructure that relies on fossil fuel use continues to grow. But imagine if the tiny minority controlling our economy were no longer in charge of our infrastructure and resources. We would be able to stop the excessive extraction of fossil fuels and the production of single-use plastic required by companies operating within the for-profit system of capitalism. We could see a surge in innovative energy sources, sustainable city designs, massive public transportation systems, and carbon-capturing technologies. There's no shortage of environmentalists, scientists, and workers in these sectors ready to do this work, but who are currently locked out of decision-making. The only thing holding these advancements back right now is the ruling class and their never-ending drive for profits. Under socialism, we could eliminate hunger by ensuring that food production and distribution are based on need and human health, rather than profit. We would coordinate globally to reduce waste. Agriculture could incorporate knowledge from indigenous peoples, and we could transform our agriculture to reinforce the Earth's biodiverse ecosystems. Food production would not have to rely on undocumented slave labor, but rather could be something many people would enjoy participating in collectively. No one would be houseless. In places like the United States, there are plenty of empty buildings and luxury apartments that people can't afford to live in. We wouldn't need to urgently create new homes. We'd simply use existing spaces. How many apartments and hotel rooms sit empty in cities where people sleep on the streets. Under socialism, we would control these resources instead of development companies and the rich. As part of a larger effort to rectify damage done by colonialism, imperialism, war, and the uneven consequences of climate change, massive investments would be made into creating quality housing in parts of the world that have been ravaged by this system. Addressing basic needs like food and housing would have a profound impact on society. When people's basic needs are met, we could really begin to address the issue of public safety, employment, education, healthcare, and all corners of life. Currently, many people who are kept in jails and prisons around the world are there because of poverty and crimes of desperation, not individual moral failing. There would be no need to endlessly incarcerate huge portions of the population whose biggest crime is being poor. As needs are met, new social norms and community mediation could take the place of violent, quote-unquote, correction facilities meant to keep people exploited and isolated from society. If working people were consciously in charge of where we put our energy and labor, we could begin the process of reorganizing the economy, our jobs, and our production. We could eliminate industries that don't serve us. Plus, instead of forcing people to compete over jobs that they hate and leaving millions unemployed, we could see who all is able and willing to do work and divide that work evenly among the population. This would relieve billions from both poverty and overwork. For all of this talk about this or that group, quote-unquote, taking our jobs, so long as there is work that needs to be done, why shouldn't the work be spread out wider so that we are freed up to spend more time with our loved ones or doing things that we really are passionate about? Rather than producing cheap goods that break easily to make a quick buck, we could produce long-lasting, good-quality products to ensure everyone's needs are met. With additional time, we could have a new abundance of craftspeople who enjoy making unique pieces of furniture and clothes. We wouldn't need fast fashion to have an interesting variety of clothes, and we could have technology that lasts and is designed to be recycled easily when it does wear out its life cycle. If the working class of the world was restructuring jobs, production, goods, and services, there would obviously have to be a way to coordinate all of this. We would establish norms around elected positions to coordinate and plan the economic production and distribution. These would not be the managers of today who boss and bully for greater profits. The wealth that has been hoarded by banks and corporate trusts would have to be redistributed on a global scale. We could eliminate the jobs of bankers and stockbrokers who gamble our wealth or whose job it is to hoard it. To the extent that banking needs to exist in a revolutionary society, the people who run these institutions would need to be held accountable to the broader society, or else fired or directly recalled if their plans for our wealth go against the democratic interests of the global working class. Without an exploitative system, eventually wealth would not be concentrated as it is today, and there would be no need for bankers. Instead, our surplus value would be logistically and democratically stored and distributed to meet the planned needs of the masses and to handle unexpected crises like natural disasters or droughts. Under socialism, when profits are no longer the driving incentive, staffing and training for healthcare would be reorganized so that more people are trained, no one is overworked, and everyone would have access to quality healthcare and medication. In socialism, we could restructure education to enrich all. The natural curiosity of young people could be realized through adventures, exploration, hands-on experiences, and apprenticeships. We would raise children to fully participate in the decision-making process of everything that impacts them and encourage them to be full members of our society, not beaten down or discouraged or shoehorned into a specific role. The family would not look the same either. Instead of placing the heavy burden and cost of raising children into one or two people's laps, communities could raise children collectively. This would eliminate the idea of the orphan, since a person's well-being wouldn't be dependent on a tiny, limited family unit. There would be an energetic campaign to begin to address the massive inequalities around the world. There can and there should be reparations specifically directed to populations historically oppressed by colonialism and imperialism. A world economy must be organized to benefit and meet the needs of the entire world's population, not just the wealthier nations. Dismantling the relationship of exploitation between nations would enable a genuine cultural exchange between people that would exist in tandem with a respect for everyone to live as they want, as well as respect for their rights to self-determination. Working class and poor people have no interest in fighting wars with each other. Today, wars are fought in the interests of elites to establish global power structures and fight over world resources. If the world ceased to fight over resources to enrich small groups of capitalists, why would we devote so much of our collective resources to building the weapons of war? We could stop using technology to figure out how to kill people and embrace it as a way to reduce the amount of work needed and give people more free time to pursue their passions. Innovation will continue for the same reason it always has. It leads to labor-saving technology. And under socialism, this benefits all of humanity because the total labor required to produce the necessities of social life can decline. There is no longer any reason for patents and the stifling of collaboration, as all new innovations would be shared collaboratively across the world. All would stand to benefit. Innovation will finally be freed from the burden of profitability and competition. The impact of reorganizing work this way would be enormous. Paleontologist and evolutionary biologist Stephen Jay Gould famously said, "I am somehow less interested in the weight and convolutions of Einstein's brain than in the near certainty that people of equal talent have lived and died in cotton fields and sweatshops." By freeing people from wage slavery and instability, we would unlock immense potential for innovation and creativity. We would see an explosion of scientists, mathematicians, philosophers, engineers, musicians, artists, and more. For all the waste of the capitalist system, by far the biggest waste is of human potential. Capitalism teaches us that success for one means failure for another. Capitalism fuels divisions such as racism and gender inequality, which have been tools and mechanisms that keep some in relative privilege at the expense of others. And they've used their state, police forces, wealth, and resources to maintain these manufactured tribes. Without class divisions, there would be no basis for racism. With an influx of wealth and a vigorous effort toward desegregation and addressing systemic inequalities, harms could begin to be repaired. The day after a revolution, racism and other harmful biases won't go away. However, when working people are no longer trapped in a zero-sum game with ourselves, then we can truly begin the process of rooting out the deep divisions that plague our society, such as racism. A revolutionary society would need to have a vigorous effort to address the material basis for these inequalities, with massive investments into things like education, healthcare, housing, and more, for populations that have been historically superexploited. There is no guarantee for success in any of this. However, if the people who are exploited by this system fought back and took power away from those who currently hold it, we'd have a better shot at transforming the world and addressing the massive problems that we face. This future may appear far off and utopian to some, but imagine if you were a human in the Middle Ages. The society we live in today would appear impossible. Ursula K. Le Guin once said, "We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable. But then, so did the divine right of kings." Some people say this is impossible because of human nature. However, let's look at the vast majority of human history that shows humans are capable of living in collective, collaborative societies. Anthropologists have recognized for a long time that humans have lived in societies organized in a range of different ways. There is no one social structure that is inevitable based on human nature. What is expressed in our nature depends on the system that we operate under, and capitalism is actually a fairly young system. More collectively structured societies create more collectively minded people. The possibility of implementing socialism is a very real one, and it is created by the conditions of capitalism. Maximum exploitation already forces workers around the world to collaborate with one another to extract, produce, and distribute our needs, whether we realize it or not. Once we do realize it, we also realize we no longer need the executives and politicians to dictate what we do while stealing most of our profits. And we realize that our collaboration allows us to produce more than the sum of our individual parts. So we have a surplus to provide for those who can't work or choose to work in different ways. So we really aren't doomed to be stuck in our individualistic, greed-driven society. When the exploited organize together, we create microcosms of a future collective society. This future will take a revolution by those who have every reason and every ability to fight against the system. Working people already keep society running, and we have nothing to lose but our chains. With working people in the driver's seat, where would we steer our world? We would have every reason to address the severe problems we face and to break down the limits that humanity is confined to today. Certainly, we have everything to lose and a world to win.